Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today we will be speaking about a very important topic in the research methodology. It is what we call the dimensions or characteristics of the research design. Because as we know, we have many research designs, as we have mentioned before, and to differentiate between these designs, we need to know these characteristics. So our learning outcome will be, at the end of this session, students will be able to discuss the characteristics or dimensions that are embedded or that determine the research design, especially for quantitative study. So regarding the dimensions or characteristics that determine different designs, they include intervention. So whether in this study you are doing intervention or not, if you are doing intervention, then your research will be interventional. Comparison group is very important, okay? Whether you have a comparison group or just a study group. Extraneous variables are very important because in addition to the dependent and independent variables that you are studying, extraneous variables exist, or these are factors that affect your result, but usually they are not a part of your study, but you have to consider them. Data collection is very important because the way you collect the data also will affect the design or determine the design. Study setting, whether you will do it in a laboratory or in the clinic, hospital, or at home, also this will make a difference. What about the intervention? Intervention, as we have mentioned, is when you manipulate the independent variables. When a researcher examines the effect of a new intervention, automatically the research design is simply interventional or experimental. Example, when you are testing a new medication, a new surgical technique, a new way of intubation, whatsoever. So if you are testing a new drug or a new technique or new instruction method, this is interventional or experimental design. Comparison group is very important because it will allow you to interpret your result. Because if you are studying one result, then you will not be able to compare them. So if you have another group which is called control group without the intervention or without the change in the independent variable, you can compare to that group. For example, when you compare smokers to non-smokers. This is very important. Just take this example. The potential negative effect of having an abortion on the psychological adjustment of adolescents. So this is a study, and you can see it is studying the effect of abortion on the psychology of adolescents. The aim of this study is to determine whether alternative pregnancy resolution or solutions have different long-term effect on the psychological functions of the young women. Because, for example, if a lady is pregnant, there are many outcomes. She can deliver normally and send the newborn to a nursery, for example, or she can give it to another person to adopt, or she can end by abortion. But in this study, actually, through groups of low-income pregnant teenagers attending primary care clinic were the subject in the study. So we have 3 groups. One group delivered and kept the baby. Another group delivered and left the baby for adoption. And a third group, they had abortion. And at the end, we have 25 subjects in each group. Without a comparison group, we would not have known whether the abortion group members' emotional status was abnormal or was affected. Sometimes researchers use a before and after comparison. For example, before abortion and after abortion, and they see the difference. Sometimes we use different groups as in this study, so that we see really if there is something in the group of abortion that is different from group of adoption or group of delivery and keeping the child. What about the extraneous variables and what are they? Usually there is a very complex relationship between variables in a study. Actually, usually you look to independent variables and dependent variables. But usually there are other factors that might affect the relationship between your independent variables and the dependent variables. And these are called the extraneous variables. See here, for example, if you are studying the activity level and it is a relationship to weight gain. This is your independent variable and this is the dependent variable. But age, for example, or gender, for example, will affect this relationship. So you have to consider them in your study. Don't forget the age, don't forget the gender, and other many factors that are called extraneous, or they are called confounding factors. Data collection and how it affects the design. Actually, when and how many times will data be collected will really affect the design. For example, many studies, data is collected at one time, okay, and this is called cross-sectional data collection. So, like you have a study group, and you come at a single setting, and you collect all the data together, and this is called cross-sectional data. For example, here we are studying the stress level, and you can see I have 3 groups: grade 9, grade 10, and grade 11. And I take all the information that I needed from these groups at a single setting. And this is called what? Cross-sectional data. Another way of collecting data is by visiting the study group or the sample many times during the time of the research. And if you look here, for example, I'm doing the same study, stress level, but instead of taking 3 different groups, I will take one group and follow it. For example, this group is grade 9. I follow them after 1 year, and I take the information again, and I follow them for a 3rd year and for a 2nd year, and take the sample again. So you can see this is one time cross-section, and this is longitudinal, because I will wait until they are in the 10th group and 10th grade, until they are in the 11th grade, and I will take again. And usually the way you collect the frequency of encounters with the sample or with the study group usually is determined by the study design, whether it is cross-sectional or whether it is longitudinal study. Regarding the study setting, it is very important because if you do it in the clinic, it is clinic-based, or if you do it at home, okay? Sometimes we need to do it in a controlled environment like a lab, because in laboratory usually you will have a better control of the confounding factors, and also you can control in a better way your independent variable. Let us just wrap up the features of quantitative design. Design features vary according to the design dimensions. Controlling independent variable, that means it is interventional. So whenever you control the independent variable, this is called interventional. If you have a comparison or control, this is controlled study. And then the way you observe your variables. Are you observing them at the current time, or in the future, or in the past? And we will see that in the coming minutes. The setting of the research is very important, whether it is in the clinic or it is in the community or in the lab, is very important. Let us see this important table and how we can see the effect of these different dimensions on the design. Example here, controlling independent variable, or what we call the interventional study. According to this dimension, our study design can be divided into experimental, quasi-experimental, pre-experimental, or non-experimental at all. So in these three, we have control on the independent or intervention. Okay? Here we don't have. So if we don't have any intervention or control on the independent variable, this is called observational or non-experimental. No manipulation of the independent variable. And according to the degree of control on the independent variable, we can classify it further into experimental, quasi-experimental, and pre-experimental. In experimental, usually, there is manipulation of independent variable. There is a control group and there is randomization, or whether an individual will be in the study group or the control group. This is done by randomization, by using the computer or other ways of randomization. So this is called complete experimental design. What about quasi-experimental or semi-experimental? There is manipulation of the independent variable, similar to the experimental, but no randomization or comparison group. But there are some effort to compensate for this lack of randomization and control group, and we will see what are these efforts later on. The third design in the experimental designs is called the pre-experimental. There is manipulation of independent variable, but no randomization, no comparison group, and limited control over the extraneous variable, very limited. And even there are no efforts, okay? Very limited, or there is no control on the confounding factors. The second important dimension is the type of group of comparison between the subjects or within the subject, because the control group sometimes can be from within the study group or from outside. If it is between the subjects in the groups being compared are different people and different groups of subject, or within the subject in the groups being compared are the same people at different times or different conditions, like what we have seen in the longitudinal and this is like what we have seen in the cross-sectional. Okay, so different groups, and here it is the same group at different times. The third important dimension is the observance, retrospective or prospective. Retrospective means that you have certain outcome and you are looking for the cause in the past. Okay, and in the prospective, you start with the independent variable or the exposure, and you follow your patient forward to see what will happen in the future. Okay, or how the dependent variables will vary with time. Last and not least, we have the setting here, whether you will do it in the laboratory, okay, where you can control effectively your independent variable and the confounded, or naturalistic, data collected in the real setting. And usually here you will not have effective way of controlling the confounders.